Marriage is supposed to be built on love and trust, right? At least that's what I believed when I first married Karen. She was my everything, sharp, witty, and stunningly beautiful. Over the years, though, something changed. The woman I once adored began to look at me with a mix of disdain and impatience, like I was an annoying fly buzzing around her perfect life. I ignored it at first, thinking it was just the stresses of life. But that night, everything became clear. We were sitting in the living room after dinner, the kind of quiet evening we had grown accustomed to, her scrolling through her phone, me lost in work emails. Out of nowhere, she sighed loudly, tossing her phone onto the coffee table. "Do you ever stop being useless, Alex?" she snapped. Her words hit like a slap, but I kept calm, asking her what she meant. And that's when she laughed. Not a light chuckle, but a mocking, bitter laugh. "You're trash," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You think you're so clever, but you're nothing. Do you even realize how pathetic you are?" I froze. My pulse quickened. Before I could respond, she leaned in, her smirk growing wider. "You know what's funny?" she said. "I've been seeing someone who actually has ambition, someone who's going places. Jeremy's a senior partner at my firm. He's everything you're not." My world tilted. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't just insulting me. She was boasting about her affair like it was some kind of achievement. And the worst part? She had no idea who I really was. You see, Karen worked for a prestigious consulting firm, a firm I happened to own. She had no clue that her ambitious Jeremy worked under me. As she continued her tirade, I sat in silence, every word carving deep into my chest. But beneath the pain, something else began to stir. A plan. Karen thought she held all the cards, but she didn't realize she was playing my game. That night, as I lay in bed beside her, I didn't feel defeated. I felt alive. The betrayal was sharp, but it gave me clarity. This wasn't just about her cheating. It was about tearing me down, and that was something I wouldn't allow. I stared at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over. She called me trash, but I was about to show her just how wrong she was. The next morning, Karen acted like nothing had happened. She hummed as she got ready for work, breezing past me without a second glance. It was as if her cruel confession the night before was just another passing comment, like complaining about the weather. But for me, it was a spark. A fire had been lit inside me, and I was done pretending to be the clueless, docile husband. While Karen was in the shower, I sat at the kitchen counter, sipping my coffee and scrolling through my phone. But this wasn't idle browsing. I was digging. Within minutes, I had all the information I needed about Jeremy. I already knew he was a senior partner at Karen's firm, but now I was diving deeper. His professional record, his personal life, even his LinkedIn profile. The guy was flashy, no doubt about it. Expensive suits, luxury vacations, a LinkedIn feed full of motivational quotes and photos of him shaking hands with executives. But beneath the polished veneer, I found cracks. A few suspiciously vague mentions of compliance issues in his past jobs. Several glowing reviews on projects that didn't quite align with the firm's ethics policies. And then there were the whispers, anonymous comments on forums and Glassdoor reviews hinting at shady deals. This was exactly what I needed. By the time Karen left for work, I was already making calls. My name carries weight in the corporate world, but I've always preferred to stay out of the spotlight. Most of the employees at Karen's firm had no idea who I was, and that worked to my advantage. Within hours, I'd arranged for an internal audit of Jeremy's projects. Not only that, but I'd flagged his name for regulatory review. Meanwhile, Karen was texting me throughout the day. "Don't wait up for me tonight," one message read, followed by a winking emoji. I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. She thought I was a fool. But this fool was about to turn her world upside down. By evening, I had everything set in motion. Jeremy's professional life was now a ticking time bomb. But I wasn't stopping there. I turned my attention to Karen. She was confident, too confident. She assumed I didn't know her well enough to catch her in her lies. That was her first mistake. I called a private investigator I'd worked with in the past and asked him to gather evidence on Karen and Jeremy's affair. Pictures, emails, even timestamps of their little rendezvous. I wanted an airtight case. When Karen finally came home, hours later than usual, she looked smug. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor as she entered the kitchen, tossing her purse onto the counter. "Late night," she said casually, pouring herself a glass of wine. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't need to. Instead, I nodded, smiled, and asked her how her day was. She didn't notice the edge in my voice. That night, as Karen slept soundly beside me, I stared at my phone, flipping through the first batch of photos the investigator had sent. There she was, laughing with Jeremy over drinks, her hand resting on his arm. Another photo showed them kissing outside a fancy restaurant. It should have hurt, but all I felt was determination. Karen and Jeremy thought they had the upper hand, but they were playing a game they couldn't win. And I was just getting started. The morning after I received the photos, I felt a strange calmness settle over me. This wasn't the frantic anxiety or helpless rage I had felt when Karen first confessed. No, this was focus, purpose. I knew exactly what I needed to do. Karen left early for work, blowing me a kiss as she walked out the door. The gesture would have felt sweet a year ago, but now it was just hollow. I watched her drive away, then grabbed my phone and dialed a number. "Mr. Carter," my head of operations said, his tone professional as ever. "How can I assist you today?" "I need a full review of Jeremy Williams," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Every contract he's touched, every deal he's negotiated. I want it on my desk by the end of the day. And notify legal. They're going to want to see this." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before he responded, "Understood." By lunchtime, the ball was already rolling. Jeremy had no idea, but his entire professional career was under a microscope. My team found discrepancies in his work almost immediately. Overinflated expenses, conflicts of interest, and contracts that were suspiciously favorable to certain clients. One deal in particular stood out, a multimillion-dollar contract that had bypassed standard approval processes. I smiled to myself. Jeremy's downfall was no longer a question of if, it was when. But I wasn't done yet. That afternoon, I made an anonymous call to the state licensing board. "I have reason to believe Jeremy Williams, a senior partner at Apex Consulting, has been engaging in unethical practices," I said, keeping my voice low. "You'll want to investigate his recent contracts. Can you provide evidence?" the woman on the other end asked. "Soon," I replied. "Check your email in 24 hours. By the time Karen got home that evening, I was already reviewing the final audit report on Jeremy. It was damning enough to ruin his career permanently. I filed the report under a pseudonym and sent it to every major media outlet in the city. "Long day?" Karen asked as she kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the couch. "Yeah," I replied, pretending to scroll through my phone. "You?" She shrugged. "Same old. Meetings, deadlines. You know how it is." I didn't respond. I just smiled to myself, knowing that her same old was about to crumble. The next morning, it happened. The first article dropped just as Karen was getting ready for work. The headline was brutal. "Senior partner at Apex Consulting under investigation for fraud and ethics violations." Karen didn't notice at first. She was too busy scrolling through Instagram, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. But when her phone buzzed with a series of notifications, she froze. "What the hell?" she muttered, opening the article. I sipped my coffee, watching her out of the corner of my eye. Her face went pale as she read, her fingers trembling. "Jeremy's? Under investigation?" she whispered, more to herself than to me. I didn't say a word. She quickly dialed a number, her voice sharp and panicked. "Jeremy, what's going on? I just saw the news. Is it true?" I didn't hear his response, but judging by the way her face twisted, it wasn't good. When she hung up, she turned to me, her expression a mix of confusion and fear. "Alex," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "this is crazy. Jeremy's been accused of fraud. Can you believe that?" I shrugged. "Sounds serious," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She didn't know it yet, but her world was just beginning to unravel. By the time Karen left for work, the scandal surrounding Jeremy had exploded. News outlets were running the story on repeat, and social media was on fire with speculation. Every detail of his questionable deals was now public knowledge, and the evidence was irrefutable. Meanwhile, I sat in my home office, watching the chaos unfold. Calls were pouring into my team from clients, regulators, and reporters. Jeremy's name was now synonymous with fraud, and the firm was scrambling to control the damage. Around midday, I got a text from one of my most trusted employees. Jeremy just walked into an emergency board meeting. Looks like they're about to drop the hammer. I leaned back in my chair, satisfied. Jeremy thought he could climb to the top by stepping on others, but his arrogance had blinded him to his own vulnerabilities. Now, the board was holding an emergency vote to terminate his contract and revoke his senior partner title. Karen, meanwhile, had no idea that her career was about to be collateral damage. That afternoon, I received a call from the head of HR at Apex Consulting. "Mr. Carter, I thought you should know. Jeremy Williams has been dismissed from the firm, effective immediately," she said. "Good," I replied calmly. "Make sure the clients are reassured. Our reputation takes priority." As the day went on, I received updates about the fallout. Jeremy's professional license was suspended pending further investigation, and the state's ethics board had opened a formal inquiry. His personal accounts were frozen, and his assets were under scrutiny. Then came the cherry on top. Jeremy's photo was splashed across the evening news. A grim-faced reporter outlined his alleged crimes, listing every unethical deal he'd ever made. The anchor ended with a statement from the firm, emphasizing their commitment to integrity and distancing themselves from his actions. Karen came home late that night, looking visibly shaken. She dropped her bag by the door and collapsed onto the couch, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "Jeremy's life is over," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh?" I asked, feigning ignorance. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "He called me earlier. He said everything's gone, his job, his reputation, even his bank accounts. He's ruined." I tilted my head, watching her carefully. For the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in her usually confident demeanor. But it wasn't sympathy I felt, it was satisfaction. "Sounds like he got what was coming to him," I said casually. Karen looked at me sharply, as if searching for hidden meaning in my words. But I didn't give her any clues. That night, as she lay in bed tossing and turning, I stared at the ceiling, knowing this was just the beginning. Jeremy's fall was a calculated move, but now it was time to shift my focus to Karen. She had underestimated me. She had called me trash. But soon, she would learn the true weight of her choices. Karen's confidence began to waver in the days following Jeremy's downfall. She wasn't her usual self, no smug comments, no sly smirks. She spent more time on her phone, whispering into it when she thought I wasn't listening. I could feel her anxiety growing, and I reveled in it. At work, things were falling apart for her too. Jeremy had been her golden ticket, the one she bragged about to everyone in the office. But now she was the woman who had openly aligned herself with a disgraced fraud. Through my contacts at Apex Consulting, I learned that Karen's name had started to circulate among the higher-ups. Not in a good way. People were questioning her judgment, her loyalty to the company. Some even speculated that she might have been complicit in Jeremy's schemes. One of my sources sent me a message. "Karen's department is being restructured. There's talk she might be let go." I couldn't have planned it better myself. That evening, as Karen sat across from me at the dinner table, I decided to test the waters. "You seem stressed lately," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Everything okay at work?" She hesitated, her fork hovering over her plate. "It's just busy," she replied, avoiding eye contact. "You know how it is." I nodded, hiding my smile. "Anything I can do to help?" Her eyes flicked to mine, and for a moment, I thought she might tell me the truth. But then she shook her head. "No, it's fine," she said quickly. "Just a lot of deadlines." The lies were piling up, and I could see the strain it was putting on her. The next day, I received an update from my private investigator. He had uncovered even more evidence of Karen's affair with Jeremy: hotel receipts, text messages, even emails sent from her work account. The sheer audacity of it all would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. I decided it was time to make my next move. Using an anonymous email address, I forwarded a selection of the most damning evidence to Karen's HR department. I knew they would take immediate action. Apex Consulting had a strict no-tolerance policy for workplace affairs, especially when they involved senior partners like Jeremy. Sure enough, I got a call from my source later that afternoon. Karen was called into HR today, they said. She looked pale when she came out. Word is, she's been placed on administrative leave. When Karen came home that evening, her usual polished demeanor was completely gone. Her eyes were red, her shoulders slumped. She didn't even try to fake a smile. "What's wrong?" I asked, feigning concern. She sat down heavily on the couch, burying her face in her hands. "They're investigating me," she mumbled. I leaned forward, keeping my voice gentle. "Investigating you? For what?" She shook her head. "Someone sent HR emails, pictures, proof that I was involved with Jeremy." I raised an eyebrow, pretending to be surprised. "That's serious, Karen. What are you going to do?" "I don't know," she whispered. "I could lose my job, Alex." For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. She was beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. But this was just the beginning. I stood, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I'm sure it'll work out," I said softly. But in my mind, I was already planning my next move. Karen's life was unraveling, piece by piece, and I wasn't going to stop until she felt the full weight of her betrayal. Karen's world was crumbling, and it was written all over her face. The once confident woman who had called me trash now walked around the house like a ghost of herself. She barely spoke, her phone constantly in her hand, waiting for updates from HR. I watched her closely, masking my satisfaction behind a facade of concern. She had no idea I was the architect of her downfall. One evening, Karen broke her silence. She sat across from me at the dinner table, her hands nervously twisting her napkin. "Alex," she said, her voice trembling, "I need to tell you something." I set down my fork, meeting her eyes. "What is it?" She hesitated, chewing on her bottom lip. "You've probably noticed that things have been off lately. Work has been stressful and I've made some mistakes." This was it, the first crack in her armor. I tilted my head, playing dumb. "Mistakes?" She took a deep breath. I got involved with someone at work. Jeremy." I feigned surprise, leaning back in my chair. "Jeremy? The guy who's all over the news?" She nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. "It was a stupid, selfish thing to do, and now it's ruining my life. HR thinks I was part of his schemes, Alex. They might fire me." Part of me wanted to laugh at her sudden vulnerability, but I kept my composure. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my tone neutral. "Because I don't know what else to do," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I've been such an idiot, Alex. I need you. I need your help." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. Did she really think she could betray me, humiliate me, and then come crawling back for support? "I don't know, Karen," I said slowly. "You've made some pretty big decisions without me. Why should I help you now?" Her face crumpled, and the tears started to fall. "Because I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please, Alex. I don't know what to do without you." I stood, taking my plate to the sink. "I need some time to think," I said coldly. The truth was, I didn't need to think at all. I already knew what I was going to do next. Karen thought admitting her affair would save her, that her apology would somehow undo the damage she'd caused. But she had underestimated me yet again. The next morning, I sent an email to a journalist I trusted. The subject line was simple: exclusive, the full story behind the Apex scandal. Attached was every piece of evidence I had on Karen and Jeremy. Photos, emails, texts, the works. Within hours, the story was live. The article painted a vivid picture of their affair, their arrogance, and the ripple effects of their actions. It didn't take long for Karen's name to start trending alongside Jeremy's. That evening, she came home looking even more broken than before. She didn't say a word, just dropped her bag on the floor and sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the wall. "Rough day?" I asked, feigning ignorance. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "They fired me." "Fired you? Why?" She looked up at me, her eyes hollow. "Because of the article. They think I was involved with Jeremy's fraud. Alex, I've lost everything." I sat beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You should have thought about that before you called me trash, Karen," I said, my voice sharp. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. For the first time, she saw the truth in my expression. And for the first time, she realized just how badly she had underestimated me. Karen's realization hit her like a freight train. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, struggling to find words. You knew?" she finally whispered. I leaned back on the couch, letting the silence linger before answering. "Of course I knew, Karen. You think I'm oblivious? You think I didn't notice the late nights, the smug little smirks, the way you looked at me like I was beneath you?" Her lip trembled, and for a moment, she looked like she might argue. But instead, she buried her face in her hands. "I was so stupid," she murmured. I didn't respond right away. I wanted her to sit with the weight of her choices, to feel the full force of her regret. "You didn't just betray me," I finally said, my voice low and steady. "You humiliated me. You called me trash, Karen. Do you remember that? You flaunted your affair like it was a joke, like I didn't matter." Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. She wasn't crying because she felt bad for what she'd done. She was crying because her perfect little world had collapsed around her. "I never thought," she began, but her voice broke. She looked up at me, desperation in her eyes. "Alex, please. I don't know what I was thinking." You weren't thinking," I interrupted. "You were selfish. You thought you could have it all without any consequences. Well, look where that got you." Karen fell silent, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. For the first time in our entire relationship, she looked small, weak. After a few moments, she spoke again, her voice hoarse. "I don't know what to do. I've lost my job, my reputation, everything. Please, Alex, help me fix this." Her words should have moved me. Months ago, they probably would have. But now I felt nothing but a cold satisfaction. "I don't think you understand, Karen," I said, standing up. "I'm not here to fix your mess. I'm not your safety net anymore." Her sobs grew louder as the weight of my words sank in. I left her on the couch and went to my office, closing the door behind me. As I sat at my desk, my phone buzzed with notifications. Karen's story was spreading like wildfire, and the comments were ruthless. "She got what she deserved. Karma is real. Imagine cheating on your husband and losing everything in the process." I couldn't help but smile. Karen's carefully constructed facade had been torn apart, and the world was finally seeing her for who she really was. That night, as I lay in bed, Karen sent me a voice message. Her words were choked with tears, her voice barely audible. "Alex, I'm sorry. I don't know how many times I can say it, but I'm sorry. I made a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake, and I wish I could take it back. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, just talk to me." I didn't respond. For the first time in years, I felt free. The days that followed were eerily quiet. Karen was still in the house, but it felt as though she wasn't really there. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, her energy drained, her confidence shattered. She tried to engage with me a few times, small attempts at conversation, questions about dinner, a meek apology here and there. I ignored most of it, responding with monosyllables when I couldn't avoid her. I wanted her to feel the emptiness she had created between us, to understand what it was like to be insignificant in the eyes of someone you once trusted. One morning, I came downstairs to find her sitting at the dining table, her laptop open in front of her. Papers were scattered across the surface, resumes, cover letters, lists of potential employers. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes red from crying. "I've been trying to find a new job," she said quietly. "But no one will even consider me. They all know about the article." I poured myself a cup of coffee, not bothering to respond. "Alex," she continued, her voice trembling, "I need your help. You have connections, influence. Maybe if you talk to someone." I cut her off with a sharp laugh. "You think I'm going to stick my neck out for you? After everything?" Her face crumpled, but I didn't stop. "You didn't care about me when you were sleeping with Jeremy. You didn't care when you called me trash. So why should I care about you now?" She looked down at her hands, tears dripping onto the papers in front of her. "I was wrong," she whispered. "I know that now. I've lost everything, Alex. Please, I just need a second chance." I set my coffee cup down on the counter and leaned against it, crossing my arms. "A second chance? Karen, you didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice. Over and over again, you chose to lie, to cheat, to humiliate me. This isn't something you can fix with an apology." Her shoulders shook as she sobbed, but I felt no sympathy. She had dug her own grave, and now she was lying in it. That afternoon, I made arrangements for the next phase of my plan. Karen had become a burden, a shadow of her former self, clinging to me out of desperation. I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her. I called my lawyer, instructing him to begin drafting divorce papers. I also arranged for the locks on the house to be changed. Karen wouldn't know it yet, but her days under my roof were numbered. The next morning, I left the papers on the dining table, along with a letter outlining the terms. I didn't sugarcoat anything. "Karen, this marriage is over. I've already spoken to my lawyer, and these are the terms of the divorce. You will not receive a cent from me. You made your choices, and now you'll live with the consequences. Consider this your notice to leave. You have 1 week. Alex." When Karen found the letter, she came running into my office, the papers clutched in her hands. "Alex, no," she begged, her voice breaking. "Please don't do this. I can change. I'll make it up to you, I swear." I didn't even look up from my computer. "We're done, Karen. You should have thought about this before you betrayed me." Her pleas fell on deaf ears. I had given her everything, and she had thrown it away. Now it was her turn to feel what it was like to lose it all. As the days passed, Karen grew more desperate. She left me voice messages at all hours, crying, apologizing, begging for another chance. But I never responded. The house felt lighter without her presence. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The morning Karen was set to leave, the house was heavy with silence. Her suitcase stood by the front door, a battered relic of better days. She shuffled around the living room, aimlessly straightening cushions and wiping non-existent dust from the coffee table, delaying the inevitable. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her. "You don't have to drag this out, Karen. The sooner you leave, the sooner you can start fixing your life." She froze, her back to me, her hands clutching the edge of the couch. "Do you really hate me that much?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hate you?" I stepped closer, letting the bitterness I'd held inside for months seep into my voice. "No, Karen. I don't hate you. I just don't care anymore. You killed that part of me when you chose someone else over this marriage." She turned to face me, tears streaming down her face. "I was selfish," she admitted. "I was arrogant. But I see that now, Alex. I see everything I've lost. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but You're right." I cut her off. "You don't." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But instead, she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Karen picked up her suitcase and turned toward the door. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. "I'll never stop being sorry," she said softly. I didn't respond. When the door clicked shut behind her, a wave of relief washed over me. It was finally over. That evening, I walked through the house, taking in the quiet. Every corner felt lighter, free of the weight her presence had brought. I sat down in my office, scrolling through the barrage of notifications on my phone. Karen's story was still circulating, but the internet had moved on to fresher scandals. For me, though, her downfall wasn't about public humiliation. It was about reclaiming my power, my dignity. As I stared out the window, the sun dipping below the horizon, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction, yes, but also an emptiness I hadn't anticipated. Karen was gone, and with her, so was the version of myself who had once loved her. My phone buzzed on the desk. A voice message. From her. Against my better judgment, I played it. Alex, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I wanted to say one last thing. You were right. I destroyed everything. Not just our marriage, but the person I used to be. I hope you find happiness, Alex. I hope you find someone who treats you the way you deserve. Goodbye. For a moment, I sat in silence, the weight of her words sinking in. I deleted the message without replying. This was my life now, a clean slate, a second chance. And I intended to make the most of it. The days after Karen's departure were filled with an unfamiliar stillness. The house, once echoing with tension and arguments, now felt peaceful. I found myself rediscovering simple joys. Waking up to quiet mornings, sipping coffee without a knot in my stomach, walking through the park without a weight on my shoulders. Work became my solace. I poured myself into the company, strengthening its foundation and expanding its reach. With Jeremy out of the picture, I took direct control of projects he had sabotaged, transforming them into successes. The team rallied behind me, their trust in my leadership growing stronger. Occasionally, Karen's name would pop up in conversations or news articles, a faint echo of the storm she had left behind. Each mention served as a reminder of the chaos I had endured and conquered. One evening, as I sat in my office reviewing plans for a new initiative, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "Thank you." Curiosity got the better of me and I opened it. Alex, I know you'll probably delete this without reading, but I wanted to say thank you. Losing everything forced me to confront who I had become, and I'm trying to rebuild. I'm working at a small firm now, not glamorous, but honest. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I'm trying to be better. Karen. I stared at the email for a long time before closing it without replying. Her journey was her own now, just as mine was mine. Months passed, and life moved forward. The chapter with Karen felt like a distant memory, a storm that had come and gone, leaving me standing stronger than before. I focused on myself, on growth, on relationships that mattered, on becoming the person I wanted to be. The company thrived, reaching milestones that once felt impossible. With Jeremy's shadow long gone, I built a team that shared my vision and values, one that appreciated integrity above all else. One evening, I attended a charity gala, a place where faces from the past often resurfaced. I caught glimpses of familiar figures, partners, rivals, even old friends. But one face stood out. Karen. She was in the corner, speaking to someone I didn't recognize. Her demeanor was subdued, her smile smaller than it once was, but genuine. She saw me across the room, and for a moment, our eyes met. She didn't approach me, nor did I approach her. But in that brief glance, I saw something I hadn't expected. Peace. As I left the gala that night, I realized I felt no anger, no bitterness. What was done was done. Karen's betrayal had broken me once, but it had also pushed me to rebuild myself into someone unshakable. Life has a way of balancing the scales. She had lost everything, and in doing so found a path to redemption. I had faced betrayal, but in overcoming it, I found freedom. The past no longer defined me. The future was mine to shape. What would you do if someone you trusted shattered your world? Betrayal can break you, or it can push you to rise higher than ever before. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming your power and moving forward. What would you have done in my place? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will make you question, reflect, and stay hooked till the end.